Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session entitled The Convergence of Generative AI and Structured Content. Today's session is brought to you by Astrix and will be presented by Gabor Fari, the co-founder and principal of InteliNotion. And we again welcome you to today's session. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment and just tell you a few things about Astrix, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gabor. So a little bit about who Astrix is, and we can go to the next slide. We are a consulting company that works predominantly in the life science sector. We've been working for over 28 years, helping life science customers with a unique blend of specialized strategic and technical services, process, and a technology agnostic approach that has made us a very unique and leading partner in helping to transform the success of life science and science-based organizations in digital transformation. That's a big thing that we are involved in, helping to shepherd our customers through digital transformation off paper into digital. Over 90% of the employees that work for Astrix bring advanced science degrees. So we're very much a science-based company helping other science-based companies. So again, that's just a little bit about us. I'm going to turn it over to Gabor, our speaker for today. I'll do a quick introduction. I'll let him pick up and tell you a little bit more about himself and his company. You can go to the next slide, Gabor. Gabor is the co-founder and principal of InteliNotion. So Gabor, if you want, I'll let you pick up from here, and I'll come back on at the end and help out with the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Gabor Fari. As Kevin mentioned, I'm co-founder and principal at InteliNotion LLC. I'm not going to read the slide to you. Suffice it to say that I've been involved in enterprise content management for over almost 25 years. I've developed my own thought process about content management, what content management in life sciences is today, what it should be. The summary is it's not document management, in my view. I think that now the advent of GenAI is bringing some new opportunities to the surface, and I'll be talking to you about that. I've basically helped co-found InteliNotion early on. I was more of a consultant, and I joined in the last 2 years. So I've joined full time to help run the company. We actually work with some of the largest life sciences companies in the world who have a structured content practice. We're very excited about how GenAI is actually adding to that vision, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later today as well. So a few words about us. InteliNotion is the next generation component and content management platform. Came out of our vision to develop a next generation platform. This really needs a platform vision, and it was not easy to do. It took us a long time. We've developed it since 2015, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've added a substantial number of customers. Some of them are quite large global pharma companies. What makes us unique is that we deliver a word-based authoring environment. The platform is cloud native. We are a Microsoft partner, and we are running on Microsoft Azure in a dedicated tenant environment. Our philosophy for security and other purposes does not really support multi-tenant environments, and this has worked out quite well for our customers so far. Our platform is API-driven and extensible, highly configurable. Our current R&D focus is GenAI, AI-assisted authoring, which I'll be talking about a bit, and leading to intelligent structured content, which is really the focus of today's presentation. We are also working on digital data flow and data-driven content and content interoperability using next generation standard formats, in particular FHIR, which is a fast healthcare interoperable resources. That was actually the topic of my last presentation a few months ago. If you'd like to learn more, please look it up on the Astrix website. So let's delve into this. I plan to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, giving you plenty of time for questions and feedback. Please try to hold them towards the end, but you're also welcome to enter it into the GoToMeeting tool. Kevin will then summarize them. I'm not going to be watching the GoToMeeting Q&A sessions. But I'll spend some time at the end. So let's talk about the AI universe. Of course, what is generative AI, which is mostly the focus of our topic today? Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. It's been decades, so to say. Then about 10, 15 years ago, machine learning started coming to the fore, leading to neural networks, deep learning systems, and generative AI. So it's not, AI is not, or generative AI is a subdomain of AI, but AI is not generative AI. Generative AI is very specialized. It does certain things well, certain things not so well, and we'll talk about those later today. But this is sort of the AI universe that we are looking at, and it's very important to make the distinction. So when we look at the classical Gartner hype cycle, which goes from innovation, a peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, slope of enlightenment, as defined by Gartner, this is a figure from set of figures from last year, for a little bit over a year ago. But I believe that the area that's highlighted in yellow is probably where we're at. There's no question that the generative AI marketplace is actually going through the classical Gartner hype cycle, and it does seem that only a few vendors are doing really well. The large vendors making a big bet on it, and there is some disillusionment already happening in customers because it's not a panacea that will solve all problems. So I believe right now we are probably just past the peak expectations where those are realities setting in as to what Gen AI is good at and with what it's not so good at. So let's talk about the issues. First of all, what is Gen AI? It's a very interesting technology. I've actually done quite a bit of research to find the best way to explain it because it's extremely complex. But if you're familiar with ChatGPT, GPT stands for Generative Pre-training Transformer. It really is a type of transformer-based neural network that actually includes several parts: an encoder, a decoder, a language model head, and dialogue generation head. So you actually have the opportunity to have a dialogue with the Gen AI bot. The model is trained in a large data set of text, and it can generate human-like text. And I actually highlighted human-like because people think that it's intelligent. People think that they can have a human-like conversation with them. It really is based on human-like text, and it really is in response to a given prompt. And what is also not that well known or understood, that there is a lot of human knowledge that's encoded into that. It's not just like an index of the World Wide Web that actually Gen AI is now magically using to give you answers to your questions, but there are armies of people who actually constantly train these models. They're the unsung heroes who actually slave away in the background to help these large companies building LLM models. So at some point, somebody made the statement that using Gen AI is like having 100 summer interns, and I thought that was actually pretty appropriate for some of the things that Gen AI does. So let's go further, and so the question is, in my mind always, is it magic or illusion? So when we look at the classical magicians, we must remember it's not truly magic, but it's an illusion. So the statement that I'm actually have formed in my mind is it really is the illusion of intelligence. And I think when we talk about Gen AI and generative AI and AI, artificial intelligence, I think the focus should be more on artificial because it really isn't intelligent per se. It's not intelligent the way the human brain is wired. And whatever intelligence it has, it's been basically encoded through human intelligence that the machine then they can replicate. So it is driven by statistical probabilities. It generates something from a pool of other things. It really doesn't create novel content. It doesn't learn or produce abstract concepts on its own. It's not truly innovative. And when we listen to the founder, one of the co-founder of OpenAI, state that he's saying that Sam Altman, he's saying that hallucinations are feature. And I think this is something we need to accept. That's the way this works. So it predicts what is next based on pattern it finds in the things it is fed. This is a pretty important statement because that's how GenAI works. We should not expect it to do things that it is not trained or trained to do. Nevertheless, it can be very useful for many things. So here are certain things that GenAI does well. Actually, in some cases, it does really well. It does a great job of summarizing content. It can edit and rewrite content. It can synthesize information, data, text, and images. Actually, it's doing a remarkable job. Some of the largest language models are doing a remarkable job in interpreting images and actually generating a text summary of images. Translations, it does well. It does coding up to a certain level, junior level programming, but basically it does not come up with fundamental no architectures or ways to program. It's very good at categorization. Text to speech, speech to text, you've seen, some of you may have seen the demos. It's very good at that. Of course, it's very good at search. It's actually increasingly efficient and useful for medical diagnosis, but not to replace, but to supplement human experts. And it's really, really good for at applications that look for patterns and connections. So these are things that are quite useful, which we can use. So rather than dismissing GenAI, I think our job is to figure out how it could supplement and humans and make human work more efficient and productive. So now, if we get back to the original title of the presentation, what is of structured content? So we built a component content management platform for structured content. And rather than explaining the complexity of what structured content is, I just use Wikipedia. So structured content is information content that is organized in a predictable way. We are leading from structured content to intelligent content, and Anne Rockley, who's a content expert, well-known content expert, came up with a very succinct statement that I'm quoting here is intelligent content is structurally rich and semantically aware, and is therefore automatically discoverable, reusable, and reconfigurable and adaptable. And then the next thing, which is sort of my view on what a document is, and I'll get back to explaining why I'd like to make these definitions, is what is a document? A document is the way people who use documents in the life sciences industry today, they basically work on documents, whether it's AI assisted or not, they produce documents. But when you think about it, a document is a snapshot of content at a point in time, and that's really drives our vision of a next generation component content management system. So our vision really is to bring all this together in a single platform. And let me talk about the details. So with the advent of large language models and machine understanding of text and text analytics and natural language processing, there are opportunities to take documents or text or and actually break it into parts. So these systems now, the LLMs and previous systems, natural language processing systems, are pretty smart and understanding how a document is composed. So it can actually find things like what's the subject, who are the authors, what's the abstract, especially if the abstract keyword is in the document, and it can find keywords, and it can also categorize content. So when you look at this, there's a statement above that documents a property graph, and this is a favorite statement of some of the database vendors. The databases now who focus on actually sort of breaking the document into a graph model. However, when you think about the science behind reusable content and structured content and how life sciences content is authored, this is, in our opinion, not quite enough. So what is really missing here is the context of the structure. So you can take content, you can actually semantically tag it, you can actually create these graphs of relationships with content components, And that, in a way, that is componentized content, but the purpose of this is a little bit different than what we are targeting. So our view is that breaking documents and components of the classical expression of chunking using semantic and linguistic content analysis techniques, it works to train large language models, because large language models actually break content into components, and they actually, when during the process of vectorization and what's called tokenization, this is quite useful. However, it is our position that this alone would not make the documents intelligent per se, or make the structure useful generating complex structured documents to meet stringent regulatory requirements. We still need to solve the problem of contextual content reuse. And this is why we're focused on a component-based approach that's actually governed by the information model. So there has to be some sort of information model that governs the reuse of content, as opposed to using a semantic and linguistic analysis techniques alone. They're useful, but not quite enough. So in our view of the world, document generation authoring really should be based in regulatory industry. It should be driven by an information model. And the older days, some of you who have been in this practice for a while will realize that there are older XML-based structures that their attempts were made in the last 25, 30 years, such as a docbook, for example. That's an XML schema. Actually, docbook is not in schema, but it predates schemas, but it uses an XML schema that actually organizes the content in logical reusable components. And this is basically the way our view is too. What is new here is this classical view of governing content reuse, and content component assembly can be augmented by AI, and AI does a couple of things really, really well. So we're actually talking about AI augmented structured content for this reason, because these documents are basically assembled according to reusable components, and the reusable components are reused in downstream documents. So I will actually give you a couple of use cases how content can flow from one document type to another. But here's a real world perspective from a medical writer we've been working with, who's got quite a bit of experience in this now, that GenAI itself is not a panacea. Some components are suitable for GenAI. For example, a protocol can be driven by GenAI, such as the study design, trial design part, the clinical summary report in the life sciences industry. The demographics summary is quite suitable for GenAI from in-text results tables. But there are other components, for example, such as adverse event reporting and loss to follow-up, that are basically standardized reusable components that are reused as is or as modified across different document types. It really doesn't make any sense to use GenAI to keep a regenerated content that's already approved and standardized. And in a highly regulated industry, approved and standardized is a must. So the system actually has to look at reusable content. The way we look at GenAI is that it frees writers up to focus on more complex writing scenarios, talk about a writing assistant type of situation. And it also appears to work better with smaller chunks of content. So there's a lot of it's been a lot of research done, and it's shown that higher quality generated content is possible to the reduced context length. So if you break down the content you're trying to generate into smaller pieces, the quality will inherently better. So, and this is why we say the structure of structured content authoring is a huge advantage, because we already define the overall structure of the document, and the GenAI can then be used at a component level. So let me, as I mentioned before, let me give you a scenario. So for example, when you take a look at the protocol, a protocol is typically a very large and complex document. It can have anywhere between 200 and 800 even more reusable components. That's a typical real world scenario. And the protocol is very important because it really is the blueprint of the clinical study. Um, GenAI is well suited for things like the purpose of the trial and certain other things like adverse events should be used as standardized library components. However, a document downstream of the protocol is the CSR, also known as clinical study report. GenAI is very useful for things like verb tense change. So in the protocol, it says what the plan is, what we will do. The clinical study report is what we have done, but it's exactly the same thing. And GenAI does a very good job rewriting that in text management. Plus, there are other GenAI results components. It can actually generate de novo text quite well, such as disposition, summarization. It can also take text and convert it to bulleted text. Those are things that GenAI does really well. And from the protocol, there's also the through reuse the informed consent form. Now, the informed consent form is a much simpler document that actually uses elements of the protocol, but it's rewritten in a lay language. So protocol is typically done, authored for and interpreted by scientists, but the informed consent form goes to the patient, participants of a clinical study. Their lay language is required. And what we found that GenAI does a really good job taking scientific language and actually simplifying it to the point where it can also reflect the level of education that's targeted and the persona. There are other things that could also be done with the persona, such as writing in the style of a regulator. So regulators like to have a certain writing style, and GenAI can actually adopt different personas depending on who the content that's generated for is intended for. So I'd like to talk to you about a couple of other things that is very important, the way we view GenAI assisted contextual authoring. So the end users will typically log into the system and will have the existing information model as to how the document is assembled, and we can have prompts at the component level. Now, prompts are the typical input to GenAI tool, and it's very, very important to the point where I wouldn't say that medical writers are expected to become prompt engineers, but they are definitely expected to understand better what prompts are and to be able to also, at times, actually change prompts to produce better content that's more suitable for them. But there are other inputs into GenAI augmented content that is also very important. Instructional text that typically goes into a document can be also made part of the prompt. Metadata, guidelines, so regulatory guidelines as well, plus dependencies on other existing documents or components that are in the system. All of this together is then driven by GenAI and driven by a particular large language model to generate the content that gets inserted into the document. But what's also very important, that a new area is emerging called RAG, called Retrieval Augmented Generation. And I think this is very important for everyone to understand what it does and how it works and the different approaches to RAG, because these when the experts talk about retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, it's really important to understand what it does and what its benefits and limitations are. So let me talk about retrieval augmented generation, or the acronym for that is RAG. Typically, content is actually ingested, and legacy content or unstructured content is ingested and chunked. I used the term chunking before. Not my favorite term, but it's an industry term. And it's chunked into vector database. And the data is prepared, fed into vector database, and the so-called embeddings that drives the large language models is there in the vector database. So it's actually stored as embeddings. And what it really does, it actually takes the input. It's almost like it compares the prompt to the content you already have, and it uses the retrieval augmented generation to enhance the prompt with what it finds in the vector database. So you can write a prompt and it actually tunes the prompt even more based on the content you already have. And this is really important because let's say a life sciences company has a document management system. There's a whole bunch of content in that that's already been written years or decades ago. And it's very important to generate new content based on the content you already have. Now, you're not going to be able to go and just train a large language model based on what you have, because first of all, you don't have enough content to train the large language model. Secondly, you have to protect your IP. You can't give that information to the large language model so it can actually build it and build it in its own model, because that's your intellectual property. What you can do, however, is use retrieval augmented generation to basically change the prompts, and that is to produce better content. Of course, there's privacy issues and data protection issues that we can talk about separately. But if you work with a trusted vendor, such as the large language model that runs on Microsoft Azure, then Microsoft will guarantee that whatever you feed to the system is not going to be used to train the model. And if you work with a large and reputable large language model vendor, they also will guarantee they're not going to use it. Obviously, it's in their own business interest to retain the trust of customers. But even so, even if you have all those guarantees, you're not going to give them your actual content. You might be able to let them have what you're looking for, but you're not going to use your own proprietary information to train the model. So retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, actually improves the quality and relevance of generated content through a search-based approach and a chunking approach where it's the information is chunked and embedded into vector database. There are other technologies as well. So lately, you may have heard about GraphRag, which is a knowledge graph-driven RAG approach, which actually takes it to the next level. So first, you were LLMs, then you had the LLMs, and then you enhanced the generation via a RAG model with a vector database. Next is the GraphRag that everyone in the industry seems to be talking about. We've done some experiments with GraphRag. Clearly, it has some benefits. I will tell you right now that the limitation with GraphRag, we found it's extremely expensive. You're actually using a huge amount of tokens to process information to generate the knowledge graph. And while it's very powerful, it's not quite clear that the result is that much better, and it's at a huge cost. So when you think of having a large corpus of information, such as in a document management system, it could be prohibitively expensive. However, if you have a small amount of content, say a few hundred documents, then the price performance ratio of knowledge graph could be quite useful. This is what we found. So it could be used for different types of application. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. So let me talk a little bit about. I'm starting to get to the end of my presentation, but let me talk about the importance of structure and governance. So GenAI itself is a black box. You have no real control what comes out of it. There is the continued importance of keeping a human in the loop. A lot of corporate executives seem to have thought, or still seem to think in these days, that they just bring in a Gen AI tool and they can actually cut their costs by X amount because they need fewer people. That's actually not the case. What they can do, though, is they can improve their productivity by quite a bit, maybe in certain cases up to 30–40%, by actually having Gen AI generate the first draft content. But it needs to be done with adult supervision. That means a trained medical writer. Content without context is incomplete. Again, I can't emphasize enough that we believe that you need a content structure by information model. And end-to-end document engineering has additional facets that remain important. We keep on focusing on this. reuse, as is, formatting, styling, publishing. GenAI will not do formatting and publishing, conditional publishing, things like that. It'll produce, in often cases, quite useful content, but it actually is sort of an assistant. So content governance remains critically important. How do you survive regulatory audit with a black box approach to partial content generation? What if regulators are starting to draft some regulations as to where GenAI could be used? But let's talk about the important issue of validation. If you want to use GenAI in validation system, you can open up yourself to a whole lot of trouble. And this is where we believe the system that actually marries GenAI with content governance and is very beneficial. So because you'll need to track content changes to both manually and GenAI created content, you need to do reuse reporting where used, reuse deviation reporting, and audit trails. So what language model did you use to generate what kind of content, and what prompt did you use? You need to be able to actually capture the thread of how content was generated if you talk about a validated system. So the structure and governance is going to be extremely important as you implement these systems. So I wanted to summarize our own approach to GenAI. We are actually implementing structured content that's driven by context reuse policy. We are driving GenAI at a component level as opposed to a whole document level. And this is actually very beneficial because we already have the structure, we already have the components. And as I mentioned, the smaller chunks of content you generate, the higher the quality will be. People are starting to ask about things like prompt libraries, so where you keep the prompts and how you reuse them. You need content reuse, tracking, and tracing. I've talked about content governance earlier. Data privacy and security definitely need a trusted cloud, and in many cases, a privately hosted version of a large language model to protect your intellectual property. And there's an increasing need for flexible Gen AI approach. So people are asking, okay, so there's newer and newer models coming out. How can we quickly use the latest models? And it does certain things better. One model does things better than the other. How can we actually use mix and match different models in the same document? These are all difficult questions that many people still haven't thought about as they're starting their Gen AI journey. So just a little bit about how we are doing this. We do have a component level prompt management. We see here on the left is our information model explorer that actually that actually allows you to model the content in logical components that actually are determined by the context that we use. And the prompts can be driven on an individual component level. When you see that little brain or cloud icon, those are typical components that are generated by GenAI, and the others that don't have that could be a table, or it could be manually generated, or it could be part of a library. So we allow people to actually build content based on the context of what the content should be, whether it's reusable, whether it's a table, whether it's GenAI, generated by GenAI. And what we've also built is we call it Content Companion. And by the way, there is a story there. We don't want to call it Copilot. Everybody calls it Copilot. And then people don't even know which is Microsoft Copilot, which is their own Copilot. So we are actually using the term Content Companion. Since we have a word-based approach, we actually built the companion into the context menu word. So typically, if you break a document into reusable components, you can actually drive the context of what you want to do. So in this particular case, you have a component, you can actually summarize it. In the case that you have a table, you can actually have the context will say summarize the table or rewrite it. And what we can also do is then we also have an AI assistant that you can ask general questions. So this system really works like ChatGPT because it has a large language model at the document level, and you can actually ask questions. But we also are able to actually drill down to the individual component level And then with right click, you can actually ask it questions related to that particular component. You can summarize the content. You can ask questions related to that component. You can rewrite the component. You can take the component and you can say, rewrite this in 2 paragraphs. It'll do a very good job of that. Or rewrite this using bulleted list. So we're really we are really focused on using the GenAI tools, what they're really good at, while adding the capabilities such as content governance for things that are missing from it. So with that, I wanted to wrap up. And I wanted to open it up for questions. I'm actually going to expand the link. I see that it's blinking, so people assumedly had questions. So Kevin, please go ahead and let's go and handle some questions.
Okay, let me do a couple things here. First of all, great presentation. I'm always fascinated. I love hearing Gabor, your presentations. They really kind of simplify what I think people tend to think is such a complicated topic, but you really boil it down into its simplest pieces, which is very enjoyable. So, great presentation.
Oh, thank you. I hope everyone else feels that way too, Kevin. But thank you.
I'm sure they did. There's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me on listening, so I'm sure they do. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.